Good morning. So we are in Germany, so we start on time. This is the Lmap working group meeting. It's Friday. It's the last meeting, or almost the last meeting before you are free to go. So let's have a nice and interesting meeting. I'm Dan Romascanu. Unfortunately, my co-chair Jason Weil cannot do it to this IETF meeting. He may be connecting remotely. Note well. So this is something that you signed when you registered. It's information about the IPR policies, or better said, pointers to the relevant documents that define the IETF IPR policies. If there are any questions or any declaration to be made, please approach the chairs or the area directors. Agenda. We still need one person to connect on Jabber. So some. Oh, excellent. Thank you. So Barbara, team, and sorry? Eugen. Okay, thank you for volunteering. Very good. Okay, so this is our agenda. We'll go shortly through the working group status. We'll go through the IPPM relevant work status. And then most of our effective meeting time will be dedicated to closing issues of the three charter documents that are now in IETF last call. We'll keep a very tight time discipline, because we want to make sure that we get to point number 7, which Olga, our guest from the European Commission broadband mapping project, is here to do a short presentation of her project. We talked a little bit about this back in Buenos Aires, and now we have the opportunity to have her here and meet the principal participants in the working group, and also inform us about their work and the relation with Lmap. And we'll have a short discussion at the end, open mic style, about the next steps. As I wrote in the email that I sent a couple of days ago, we are approaching, and hopefully in 1 or 2 cycles, we'll be able to submit the documents to the ISG. Of course, the working group will be here to address all comments that we may receive during IETF last call. But it's a good time actually to think what we plan to do ahead with this working group. Any agenda bashing? Okay. Working group status. I start to be concerned because I don't see Al Morton here, but let's hope that he will show up in the last minute. Okay, so we have the 2 RFCs that are related to the requirements and architecture. We have 1 RFC from IPPM with the basic registries. We have 2 working drafts on the metric registry structure and the initial population of the registry, which we'll hear hopefully an update from Al Morton. And we have the 3 documents in working group last call, which are the information model, which is a principal document, and from it we derive the data model based on Yang, and the protocol document based on RESTconf, and we'll have a discussion about how this goes and some ideas about possible simplification of the document. During the last 2 years, we had a number of non-chartered items that have been submitted to the working group, individual submissions. Some of them were related support documents, like the examples ID by Al Morton. Some other were proposals for new work. And we made, in previous meetings, we made room at the end of the meetings for short presentation and updates about that work. We had also a couple of documents about deployment or operational experience, which non-standardized versions of large-scale measurements in different areas of the globe. We had such IDs from originating from Japan and from China, and have proposals for new work, as I said. Some of those are expired, but again, in the period between now until we complete the current charter, we invite people to reopen those discussions if they are interested to continue, and of course there needs to be a proper consideration about the need urgency of rechartering. And as I said, just in time, Mr. Al Morton steps into the room. Not before I say a few words about implementation. So I actually we made a call for sharing implementation information. At this point in time, we received answer only from Jürgen concerning, do you say Jacobs, right? Jacobs University implementation. So would you like to say a few words about your implementation, Jürgen? By the end, okay. If there are any other implementation out there, we'd like to know and share information as much as possible. The most important, running code. Okay. Whenever you have such information, including pointers to code, if open, please share. And one good way would be to support actually the approval of the documents would be if you are capable, for example, to include some demonstration or interoperability testing that as part of the hackathon next time or in some other environment, similar environment. Okay. Any questions about the status? Taking no as an answer. Yeah, Al, we have your short update about what happens in IPPM. I believe it's better here. I think that Yeah. You've got, okay, Jason is has connected to Meet Echo. Good morning or good night, Jason.
I think it's very early morning there.
Yeah.
About 4 a.m. or maybe earlier. So hi, I'm Al Morton. I'm going to give the quick status on the IPPM working group, the things that we're most interested in. And that's primarily the development of the registry, which one of the things that we started to begin to support this work so that we would have comparable metrics specified well enough such that different vendors, different operators could make the same measurements and have them be comparable in the end. So that's the high bar that we've set for entry into this IANA performance metrics registry. So this week we got extremely good feedback due to the presence of several regulators in the IPPM meeting. Several folks from the BEREC European regulators group joined us. They gave a presentation on what they were looking for. They gave a presentation on how and what they plan to measure. And so then I gave an overview of the registry, and we immediately got some really good feedback. One of the points Mr. Ahmed from Ofcom in the UK made was, what about calibration? And essentially, is there some way we can have a report of the accuracy of these systems, which would be sort of a reported measured output. I think thinking this over, it's going to be a combination of the calibration that's done in the lab, and then also the status of the time synchronization for time-related measurements. I think the combination of those two things could be part of the output for every metric. So we haven't tried to implement this yet, but I think those are along the lines that I see Ahmed nodding back there a little bit. So that may be what we try to implement. There was some other feedback too. Obviously, we want a trace route measurement in the future. That's got to be methodologically well defined. We've got a small group in IPPM working on that, and also we have sort of a need for ICMP ping-like measurements, which aren't currently in the registry, but that would be helpful. That came up as a result of some list discussion with Linda Dunbar and Jürgen. So what else? Oh yeah, so this week I managed to get together with IANA, and that was an interesting interaction about the registry as well. So we're starting to get their review. Michelle Cotton has given me lots of things to check out and lots of things to work on to tighten up when it comes down to the creation of the registry there. So I mean, this is going to be a big task, and it was good to get their early review. They're less concerned about this than they might be because it's expert review. I mean, they prefer that mode of operation. Let's see, anything else? Oh, and so we're still working on the initial contents for the registry, and that's been a good, a sort of a circular driving function to improve the registry elements. So I think that I think that's a pretty decent summary. And any questions?
Yeah. So do you have an expected timeline for the creation of the registry?
So we deliberately decided to hold the registry format and process our internet draft up, so that if we learn anything in filling out the registry entries, the initial contents, we can fold that right back in, rather than having to correct it later and to go through the plan is to bring these two documents to approval simultaneously. Now, as far as the date for that, I kind of doubt we'll be done with that by Seoul, but just thinking in terms of the year, I'm guessing it maybe sometime early next year is maybe a good target for that.
So do you believe that we need synchronization with the approval of the Lmap documents? Because when Lmap hopefully will discuss about it, but we're also trying to hit probably submitting the documents by Seoul, and then it will take what it will take in order to run them through IETF last call and have them approved. But it's also early next year.
So I think the interactions that we had late last year and early this year between Lmap and the IPPM registering folks were very good, and I don't see those parts of where the protocols have to call out registered metrics and deliver their results. I think those aspects have been sorted out to the degree that's pretty close to the degree that's necessary, right? So it's good that we've had those interactions. I think at least the indication of registered metrics as far as their index number, that flew well with IANA, so I don't think that's going to change. I think it's probably stable enough that we can forge ahead and worry about surprises if necessary.
Okay.
All right.
I understand the conversation you had. Just for the minutes, can I understand the conversation you just two had was that you had asked if the alignment of the Lmap submissions needed to be with the IPPM submissions?
Right.
And the answer to that was?
I think we're pretty well synchronized in the ways that I think our interactions have provided the synchronization that we need, and now we just have to worry about surprises between now and whenever the Lmap documents are.
So let me tell you in my other words. We seem to be targeting more or less the same time frame, which is beginning of the next year, but we cannot anticipate now what hurdles we may encounter, for example, during IETF last call or ISG review. So this may delay one or the other, but in principle, it doesn't look like there is a gap of half a year or a year or something.
Jürgen Schönwelder. I can't say whether it's right or wrong, but at the moment we have an informational reference to the registry. It's not even a normative content.
Yes, but for deployment purposes, you need the registry.
Not necessarily.
If you want to implement like the full standards framework, yes. If you just want to do your own measurements, no.
Okay.
Please, Mike.
I'm sorry to butt in. I might not be.
But just state your name, please, for the.
So my name is Ahmed. Alex just introduced me earlier.
Welcome.
Thank you, kind sir. I don't want to discuss the information model, which I had a look at the night. But what I wanted to say here is, obviously, RFC 7536 already has the regulatory use case discussed briefly. And as we start looking at, so the regulators start looking at expanding on that work in the future, I'm just wondering whether there is whether this forum would welcome discussion from us via the email system on what we regulators would like, and sort of start a discussion around that area. This is to build upon the conversation we've already had.
So if there's anything related to the process of collecting measurements and pushing those results to a collecting system, that's the right focus here. If it's on which metrics ought to be measured and which ones should be in the registry, that should go to the IPPM list, just to keep the responsibility.
And that's in line with the better thinking. Going back the year before, we separated the two the problem into two dimensions. We call the science, which is the metrics and how they measure and how accurate they are, and the engineering, which is how you build a system around collecting those. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Al. Okay, next is the information model.
Yeah, hello, my name is Jürgen Schönwelder, and we go to slide number 2. The documents are in working group last call. It runs until the end of this month, I think. What we need is people reading the documents. And even if you read them and you're fine with what you had, it might be useful to indicate that you actually read it, right? There are a few issues still listed in a document because either I wasn't sure whether we had closure on it or it was clear that there were still discussions about it. The first one was the cycle number. And I created the slides 2 days ago. And yesterday evening, I met with Al to try to sort it out. And Al and I discovered the wonders of face-to-face communication and a sheet of paper and a pen, because we could make a drawing. I wrote the outcome of the discussion up yesterday and sent it out as an email. And if we want to go into the details, then probably Dan can bring up the email. Yes, so the outcome was, so we created a drawing, this example drawing, in order to understand which points in time we actually report. And that's essentially the start of the action and the end of the action. So for every result record, you get the start of the action and the end of the action. And implicitly, if you take the timestamp of the first action, you also get the time when the execution of the whole schedule started. Now, the start of the schedule itself might be randomized. So the event, if it's a recurring event that's running every 30 minutes, for instance, triggers at a certain point in time, you might add a random offset to it, and then the schedule starts running. What we didn't capture was the original time without the randomization added. And that's the first thing we immediately agreed on and said, well, that's really useful to have. And so the first change here under A essentially says, no, it's not A, it's B. In the result record, we add another field that carries this timestamp when the event triggered before adding the random offset and then kicking off the schedule. The cycle number that Al wanted is actually a function applied to exactly this timestamp. So the cycle number doesn't include the randomization. So the second addition is to have a cycle number, which is essentially the same timestamp, but you round it down to a lower granularity. So you have an interval of, say, 5 minutes, and you get this timestamp rounded down to 5 minutes, to the closest multiple of 5 minutes. And so that's under C, so we propose to add another object, MA report result cycle number. And the representation of the cycle number is going to be digits dot digits, where the first digits encode the date, so year, month, and date. And then there's a dot, and then after the dot you have hours, minutes, and seconds. Okay, now in order to do that, you need to know the interval, which is determining the granularity of the cycle number. And so we figured out that this is something to configure on the event source itself. So if you set up, let's say, a calendar recurring event source, you can say, well, give me the cycle numbers with a granularity of 15 minutes, for instance. And so you kick off, the event triggers, you add a random delay, you start the schedule, and so on. If the result report comes back for an action, you get the cycle number with a granularity of 15 minutes. If you don't set this up, you don't get a cycle number. So if you're not interested in cycle numbers, you just leave out, and that's not going to be in the result. That's the proposal on the table. Is everybody happy with it, or is it still unclear? Or someone? Yeah.
So this is Tim Carey, Nokia. So this still all kicks off when I do the reporting. I still have the tag for the context identifier, or so I still have the tag. Does that kick off, when I report the cycle number, is that caused by the tag or the context identifier, or this is all?
The tag is a separate issue. So you assign a tag to it, and the tag will be reported if there is one. So it's not, it's essentially independent of that.
It's all separate now.
Yeah.
So you get the tag, it'll pass through, And then you use this mechanism to do the identifier. Okay.
So you have the choice of getting nothing or just one of them or both
Or
of them.
both.
So it's
Okay.
depending on how you set it up.
Gert Grummel. I'm just thinking about the cycle number. Occasionally, I want to start, basically, you want to trigger it kind of manually. And I was wondering whether we could use a similar kind of logic to push it instead of a cycle number, because there is no cycle at that point in time, and it may even interrupt or overlap with an existing cycle. A kind of, say, a hash number or whatever, just to identify what exactly comes back based on that particular trigger.
So the way this is set up, it's so you have parameters that apply to all event sources, and then you have different types of event sources. And one of them is like immediate, which is, press the button and it's going to run. This is on the generic part.
Right.
So if you want to use a cycle number even for something that you trigger manually, you could do so. Whether that's valuable or not, I don't know. It depends on what you're doing likely.
When you call it cycle number, I think you don't imply that it needs to be sequential. It's just kind of an integer, I guess.
What do you mean by?
Well, the way you described it before was basically you take, let's say, an integer of, I don't know, 5 minutes interval and just continue the way. Now, if you would like to have a number for a triggered response, it kind of overlaps with the background cycle. So basically what you get is you get back a lot of responses. Some of them get the cycle number of let's say the background. Some others get them have nothing coming back because they're triggered in parallel, let's say with a manual thing. So it would be nice to have them sorted out by pushing a random number in the cycle for manual triggered versus kind of sequential one when you just have a kind of a time-based polling kind of mechanism. I mean, it's an add-on. It's not contrasting. It just suggests to think a little bit about it.
Well, if you want to run something that shouldn't produce a cycle number, you just don't set this parameter and you won't get a cycle number. So that's what you usually would do. I think if you do something immediately, you just run it.
Yeah, but it's kind of who is triggering what at which point in time. So it might be say I would feel more comfortable if when I trigger something, I know this is the response for the request I pushed down. So kind of more kind of a positive indication that this is mine, rather than omission of information suggesting that probably it's mine. It's a subtle logic, I admit, but just think about it.
Go ahead.
Philip Bradley. I just wanted to make sure I'd understood your requirement. So in the report, you wanted to know what had caused the measurement to be done, whether it was a sort of normal schedule or whether it was the kind of the user in the home or somebody pushing a button and saying measure now. Is that right?
Yeah.
You want to know that? Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think
So it was.
Into the mic.
yeah, go ahead.
He wants to know in the report what has triggered the measurement to be done. So was it a normal schedule, or was it somebody in the home pushing the big button that says, please measure my broadband line now? And I think that's a reasonable thing, isn't it?
And it is, and Al Morton thinks that the way you can easily sort that out is to provide a tag, like we just talked about. So the Tim's tag for the repeating measurements that were originally part of the cycle ID, they would say this is the repeating test or whatever, and Gert's one-off test can say this is Gert. You can name it your own name. And you'll know in the results, you can search through that in the database and find your one-off result.
I think I understand the requirement. I don't think we really do this at the moment because we don't have tags on the event sources. We only have tags on the schedules. So you would have to either create a new schedule along with it, and then of course you can easily identify the difference. But
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point, isn't it? Because the tag was described as being something that was echoed, wasn't it? It was, yeah, exactly.
Al Morton asks, doesn't a one-off task or event have to have its own, what did we call it yesterday? Event, the parallel lines.
the schedule?
Well, no, not, you have the whole schedule and then you have different event.
So we have event sources or whatever
Event
you want to
sources.
call it.
There can be multiple event sources, and this one-off measurement would have to have its own event source, right?
Right, but we don't report anything about that in the result.
Ah, okay.
And we have one specific event source. We have a few specific event sources, like immediate. That's if you do it manually, you just say do it immediately. One of would say do it at a certain point in time in the future, but don't repeat it. We have things like I lost connection to the controller, which would give you an event. We don't report any of that back in the result. So you get a result, but you don't know why you got it. So we have to think about how to provide that context so that in the result record you actually know why was this executed and what should I do with it. I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Zahmed again. There's one thing that we tend to be bothered with a little bit more, and that is the integrity of the measurement itself. We could be moving into a world where whatever you measure should stand in some sort of a court of law. You might want to have a discussion with the ISP about whether they're providing the same quality of service that you contracted for. So I just wanted to know whether this forum thinks about data integrity and system security at this early stage as opposed to as an aftermath.
So this working group is not concerned about the measurement itself. So that's IPPM's problem. Yeah. So we are concerned about doing the scheduling, producing result and sending it back. The idea is that the protocols, well, actually the protocols that the IETF considers are all using strong encryption. So the idea is that on the communication part, it should not be possible to change it.
I believe that's what, correct me if I'm wrong, but what he's asking if we have any indication about the reliability of the delivery of the information. And that's kind of, we can say, okay, we rely or we make certain requirements on the transport, or we can say we put something in the protocol, but it's a fair question that I believe that a security review would bring up.
Precisely.
Probably. So another dimension could be that one could think of, I run a measurement, it produces data, but I actually want to have the data signed. So that, even later on, if it sits in a database, I can actually go and verify whether the data is still the data that was originally generated, right?
But has that discussion been taking place? I'm gate crashing the party here.
As far as I recall, not.
So Philip, we did have some stuff about how much you can trust the measurement. I mean, there are lots of aspects of this integrity, aren't there? From, including, well, I'm going to try and sort of cheat in terms of the way the measurement is done. I'm going to, am I going to have other traffic going on in the home network whilst, it's supposed to be quiet for the measurement to be done? Or am I going to prioritize the measurement traffic over ordinary traffic in order to ensure that the result looks good? I mean, there's all sorts of things. And we talked about that kind of side being out of scope, and that has to be covered by kind of agreements between the regulator in this instance and the ISP, just out of band, sort of best practice. So there's lots of aspects to the integrity in there, as well as, well, is actually the result that's in the database, the result that was reported.
Well, I can see the real use case of, having multiple parties involved. Someone is running measurements, it's going to a collector, which might even be a second entity, and that's moving data to a regulator, which is a third entity. So ideally, in an ideal world, the regulator might be able to verify whether something in between was messing up the data, right? So you can't really we never talked about, can you actually sign the data as close where it's being produced and be able to later on check whether that data is valid. Might not even clear whether that's in scope of what we're doing here, but I think it's at least something valid to think about.
So I wasn't talking about the carrier, the ISP, kind of like gaming the measurement. That's a risk we understand, we know, and we quite know possibly how to protect against. I'm more thinking about, once the measurement is done, how do you maintain its integrity from the client or from the server, whichever way you're doing the measurement, all the way back to the database, and maintaining that integrity all the way through.
And by the way, just to interject here, gaming actually was discussed in the phase of pre-chartering, and we put it explicitly out of scope.
Alyssa Cooper, but I mean, it's fair to say that in the definition of the protocol, it's going to carry this information that confidentiality and integrity shall be addressed, right? Like it's kind of like standard part of the process when we define a protocol to carry any kind of sensitive information that we check all those boxes. So I think maybe we over-interpreting your question a little bit, but that's kind of always a part of the discussion that we have here.
I wasn't referring to the protocol level. I was more thinking about the sort of in a multi-stakeholder environment where you have the clients could be owned by certain organizations, individuals, whatever, and the servers could be again owned and run by different people, different organizations. So really, this is about the integrity within a distributed measurement system as opposed to a vertically integrated system. We can guarantee sort of integrity and security and all that if it was one measurement system run by one organization, very vertical, but I don't think that's the impetus here. I think this is more of a distributed system, and hence the question around system integrity, data integrity, information integrity becomes real and out of the front. But I think signing data or measurements after they've been done before transport might be a way forward. But what I'm trying to do here is to sort of get this one to think along those lines right at the start, and not sort of bolt it in later on and the thinking.
Let me ask a question here, kind of a process question for the working group. We are in the first working group last call, and it seems to me very probable that we'll have a second one. Do we want to ask for an early security review of the document from the SAG team? We can do it. Kind of trying to avoid to the possible extent issues that may be raised later and be more painful because of the timing.
Barbara Stark, I guess I'm really confused about security in the context of an information model and security in the context of RESTconf. I have no clue what you would be wanting them to review. I mean, there's already a security section in the framework, which Lmap published, and I think the framework does talk quite a bit about security, and that what did have a security review. Did I say Barbara Stark? Oh, sorry.
Yes, it's good for the note taker.
Alyssa Cooper, yeah, these documents don't really strike me as kind of rising to the level where you would need an early sector review. you will get sector review during IETF last call anyway. Just to, I mean, always trying to be respectful of their time because they review every single draft at least once. So that's kind of my instinct on these.
Okay. Okay. Are we done with this issue?
Well, I think he brought up a valid point, but it seems to be outside of the scope.
It's not within. Yeah, it's a different point. And yeah, it would be good if you sent also the issue as a comment to the list, so that we can basically kind of discuss. Maybe more people who did not attend this meeting, and so they can have their opinion. Okay. So the proposal on the table, watch the mail list. So the mails that showed actually is on from the Lmap working group list. And would like to hear your comment, including comments like I like it. Comments like I hate it must come with arguments.
Second issue is the channel option name. So during the evolution of this model, we had two options kind of hardwired in the information model. So now essentially we are just running tasks. We really don't say anything specific about what the tasks do. They might do measurements, they might do reporting, they might do other things. And for all the measurement tasks, we have a registry. And if you have a well-known registry registered metric, then the metric defines what are the parameters that you can set at runtime in order to run this. So the idea here is that in the information model, we stay abstract. We don't specify any concrete parameter names or something like that. We had one parameter name, one option name that was the role that became part of the information model proper. So that's why that went away. What we still have is the channel option name. And I would like to get rid of it from the information model. I think we should not hardwire for one very specific task how an option is called. I think we should have some late binding mechanism to that, so we actually can treat it like metric definitions as something that you need to know, but you shouldn't hardwire in the information model itself.
So Tim Carey, Nokia. I need the channel information. And I need it as either a first-class attribute or I need it as a well-known option name, because I need to be able to coordinate that between the controller and various MAs that come from different vendors. So for me, I would either keep it or actually put an attribute on the places where we use that. I think it's in the task and in the schedule or somewhere. Like there's 2 or 3 places I think that we use that. So I use that specifically in the TR69 model in order to reference back to mechanisms that we use to actually push the reports to the collectors. So it's needed for me. I have to be able to attach to a well-known something, whether it's an attribute or a name like channel.
So is that really part of your data model?
I need to know what the channel is in order to be able to reference it back for the pushing of data. And so I have to know what that is if I'm using what the channel is. And that's all I can really say about it right now. I just need it. It's part of the data model. I use this information for the data model. So I have to know that this is indeed the channel. It's the way I reference the stuff in the data model to get things back.
So you're running the reporting not as a separate task, but you're running it as something that is built into the TR69
in TR69, they already have like if you know the yank push mechanism. So they already have a yank push mechanism. So we allow for channels, right, communication channels to actually be done through the Yang, well, not the Yang push, but the TR69 push mechanism, the bulk data collection mechanism, right? And so we were able to do that by knowing the channel, be able to reference back to a channel name. So again, keep it as, and it works just fine now. Don't break my model, or put it as an attribute, and I can handle it that way either. But don't get rid of it as saying it's no longer a well-named thing.
Is that okay because the applicability is not obvious for if the data model language is Yang? Would it be okay if we actually put a comment that actually this kind of supports data models where a push task basically carries the option?
Well, I don't know why you need to do that, but if that's what you need to do. I mean, originally
Just clarification for
right. Originally, this was actually an attribute, and we thought we'd say, okay, we'd save the attribute by making it an option.
Right.
And then now we're saying we don't even want it as an option, and I'm saying no, I need this one. I need.
Okay. Can you live with it?
With what? There were two things. Difficult to say yes, no.
Bertijn, so Jürgen, can you explain why you want to remove it?
So the way the things work is the Lmap framework. It's running tasks, you know, and tasks have options. And now there are reporting tasks that of course need to know where to send data to. And a measurement task that of course need to know which system to measure, right? They all have different options or parameters. And now the information model just says we are running tasks. We don't talk about the specific options that you set to measure a trace route. We don't talk about what a, so for consistency reasons, you would say, well, why would we hardwire the option for a reporting task has to be channel, right, in the information model.
But I'm not, so if you have the option name, I'm not sure why it doesn't have to be mandatory, but if you remove it, it's all gone. So this is,
Right, we have options. The information model would not define it has to be called channel. Like we don't specify an information model. If you run a tracer out, you know, the option for, I don't know what is called something.
So the difference is, this is Tim Carey. So the difference is the channel concept is part of the information model. We just decided to put it in, it used to be an attribute of the information model, but then we decided to make it an option. So if we're saying we don't, and options are specific to metrics. So if we're saying we don't want to call out things that are specific to metrics in the options, I'm perfectly fine. Then make the channel first class attribute in those places. Those are the two options that I would consider reasonable to do. But to just remove it completely out of the information model is not acceptable for the needs that I have in BBF.
So, Chair, declare the consensus.
Anybody has a problem with leaving the option? Okay, inside it stays. Inside it stays.
In which form? As it is written right now, or as an explicit object?
Any preference or problems as written right now?
I think it was originally an explicit one. If we make it explicit one, I think that would be better, but I don't think it will work with either.
So where would it all show up? Because you likely need more channel information because you, well, it depends also how you organize the communication to the controller itself, because you need to know how to find a controller.
So there was, I think, 3 places that we originally had it, right? Where we have options today, right? I think we had the channel can be in one of those 3 places. If you give me a second, I can bring up the model and I can look to see where it's used, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. So probably we should sort this out
Right.
between the 2 of us.
Yeah. So resolutions that it stays and it will clarify exactly where.
So this is just, so we had a discussion about the MA schedule end and the MA schedule duration. So objects that allow you to control or time limit how long something is executing. And I wasn't sure what the outcome of the discussion was. So did we agree with what we have is okay, or?
So this is Tim Carey, Nokia. This is perfectly fine with me.
Okay,
The resolution.
So then the next one, so slide 5. That's something that occurred to me because I'm familiar with the RIPE Atlas platform, and on the RIPE Atlas platform, you can get their probe tags. So probes have tags that say something like, you know, I can do IPv6. Or they say something like, oh, I know that I'm on a DSL line. And we don't really have something like that. So we have some very specific pieces of information that we export about the probe, but we don't have something which is more flexible. And the question is whether we want to have something like that or we don't need it. So the change would be that would add a way of tagging the probe itself. Right now we can tag actions, we can tag schedules, but we can't tag the probe itself.
Bert Wijnen, so RIPE Atlas actually has 2 types of tags. A number of tags are like they detect what the system can do, so the user cannot change that. Like if the system finds out it can do IPv6, the user cannot say it's not IPv6 capable. The user can also set his own tags. So if you do a measurement or you do a set of measurements, you can tag certain probes with, you know, something that you want, and then you can see that tag and know it comes from these types of probes. So you could say, I tag my probe as existing in a university environment, or existing in an academic environment, or existing in a commercial environment, or something like that. And based on that, you can pick out data that you want to analyze, right? So I'm not sure whether my question then is, I'm not sure whether you
using the protocol, but it's about the outwards outreach. Right.
So that's a good clarification in the text about this.
Right.
It should be clear that its capabilities beyond the Lmap
Right.
realm.
Right.
And by the way, I'm perfectly fine with this. I just wanted to see how the plan to do this matched up with the scope.
Okay.
Alyssa Cooper, but if it's sort of defined in an open-ended way, then you could use it for anything, right? I sort of thought that's more the direction you were going, which was to have this kind of generic field where in the future, if you realize that there's some information about the MA that it's useful to convey, that you would like to have a place where you can do that, which would mean not really constraining it as much as I thought you just articulated. I'm not arguing one way or the other. I just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page.
I think we are. Right.
Hi, Brian Trammell. Where I see this as useful is for both. So the RIPE Atlas style tags of information that we have about the system, as well as measurement capabilities for which metrics that the measurement agent can actually export, right? So like essentially references into the IPPM registry that we're working on. I'm saying this without my IPPM chair hat on, by the way. Oh, that's in the IM, right? Ah, okay. Yeah, so I actually agree with I agree with Alyssa on this one. Then I think we should make this one it's called tags, right? So that kind of says to me whatever the admin of the box wants to do can actually, like, you can actually add stuff to this. So if you're going to add constraints on it in the data model such that it's not essentially free form, then it shouldn't be called a tag. So I think that it should be free form, and I think that it should be called tags. But if there's a desire to restrict it, then it's named wrong.
No, that's true, and I believe that's the intent because it talks about high-level information about the ZMA. So okay, taking into account this, and of course, pending we need to see the text, but consensus of the room. Should we take a hum? Or should we actually ask, okay, we heard the number of yes. Are there small no's or big no's? Okay, so let's do this, and we need to see the text, of course.
Okay, slide number 6. That's, I think, got resolved. There was a comment by Tim about, what exactly is an active schedule, and I think the new wording is clarifying that. So that will go into the next revision. And then there was another issue that Tim brought up where we had a discussion about what exactly the storage parameter is, and I think, sorry, it wasn't clear, is that something that sits in main memory or something that sits in secondary storage? And if it's secondary storage, does it include executable sizes, or is it really just data? And the intention was it's really just the data that might be queued up for the next iteration of a schedule. And I think that resolves Tim's concern, but we still have to put the wording into the document.
No, this is Tim Carey, Nokia. I have no issue with the resolution. It was really the text that I found confusing as I was trying to interpret it for the data model. So I don't know what the text is that you're proposing to clear up the ambiguity.
Yes, I haven't yet proposed something concrete, so I will send out
but the resolution is fine. I understand your resolution.
Okay.
Somehow that can go in.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so resolution fine and modulo text.
Yeah.
Okay, I believe that was the last one.
Good.
Okay, so let's get to what is this? What is this? Okay. Data.
So the Yang data model. And I think there's only one issue. In the information model, we have a conceptual distinction between configuration and an instruction. So configuration is the information that is on the box, supplied by whatever configures the box, and that's needed to bootstrap the box, start getting connected to the controller and so forth. Once you talk to the controller is pushing down information, what kind of measurements to run, and that's called an instruction. So in the information model, we have this distinction. At the end, the configuration is a set of schedules, namely the schedule that determines how you kick off the task that is establishing communication to the controller. The instruction is a set of schedules, namely the things that you carry out in order to measure data and to report the data. So structurally, it's the same information, but it has been split organizationally in order to make this difference clear. So there's configuration and then there's the instruction. In the Yang data model, we don't really have this distinction. We just have a single list of schedules, and we don't really have this bit of information, what is configuration and what is instruction. And the question is whether that's fine or whether we should think about it. I don't know how TR69 actually does it.
So in TR69, what we do, and we do the same thing for tasks as well, right, is we have single lists. So it's a single list of tasks for an MA and a single list of schedules. And then what we do is we provide through the instruction, because you want to keep the referential integrity through the instruction, we have references back from the instruction to the schedules list. So you can say, hey, instruction, what are all the schedules that are related to you, right? And then the scheduled list is where all the schedules are really at, right? We do that same thing for tasks and schedules, and the only thing that the instruction now holds itself is suppressions.
Okay. So I've been thinking about, if I would do the separation in Yang, I could create two separate lists. Now, if you do that, the advantage of separating that out would be that you can actually apply different access control policies to it, which would probably be a bonus. The downside is that you have to think carefully about the naming and the namespaces. If you have multiple lists, can you have things with the same name in the two different lists? And frankly, it actually doesn't work if you look at the information model, because the way we refer to an action that got executed is by assuming that the schedule name and the action name together is kind of uniquely identifying an action. If you would have two lists, that kind of falls apart. That speaks against this and actually keeping a single list.
So this is Tim Carey. So can't you just do access control on the schedule instance by, Tim's the instruction guy, he's the only one that's allowed to execute that schedule on the particular instances? That's what we do in 69. It's,
Probably I would have to look into, I'd have to wake up Andy. Andy, you're a NACM expert. Can I have NACM rules for specific entries on the list?
Yes.
Okay.
You have keys in the data rule.
Okay, good. So you could have, so having separate lists would make it easier, but you can still do it on individual list entries.
Can we get the name of that component that was not provided? Okay.
So my proposal is, after thinking about it, is actually not changing it and keeping a single list. And if TR69 does the same thing, that's probably a good reason even to stay consistent. Okay, if everybody's fine with that. Oh yeah, there's another slide on examples. I have an example configuration in the document, and it's in XML, it's in JSON. It's longish, and I would like to cut this down. Now, yesterday when I was sitting down with Al, we were drawing up this example, and I think meanwhile it's a very good idea to use exactly the same setup for the example that we include. And I would like to only include the XML representation of it and leave the JSON out of it, just to save space. And we know printing and paper costs is bad for our environment, so making the document shorter might help.
So just clarify the proposal. So you mean keep the XML encoding examples here, and actually move the same examples JSON speech in the protocol document?
Yes, I think in the protocol document, I think there's currently a mixture of some JSON and some XML. And so since we have those three documents, it might be useful, but have the same example actually. So that's conceptually always the same example. So if you read the information model and you look at the timeline, you can actually find in the young data model how you would write a config for exactly that timeline. And you can look into the protocol and you actually can see the HTTP interactions that you would get when you use RESTConf to send it over the wire. My hope is that that helps readers to correlate between the different documents more easily.
Okay, did everybody understand the proposal? Works for all in the room? So the proposal is actually to kind of carry the example, the same example in the three documents. Data model will have the XML encoding format, and the JSON format will be moved to the protocol, the RESTConf document. But it's basically the same example, both.
I guess most people like you don't care.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, again, this document is a working group last call, Having people read it would help. I think we got a young doctor assigned to it, which is still on vacation. So we
Right.
need to get a review there.
And the young review may not come within the time because it's the IETF weekend, so, but we'll have it.
Okay, last slide set is about the protocol. Now, we don't really have to say much here because we don't define a protocol. We just use a protocol defined elsewhere. The question is, what exactly does this document have to say? Is it just saying, well, if you want to use it with RESTConf, there's a RESTConf specification over there, and you might want to look into the call home specification over there. This is the kind of interaction that you get on the wire if you implement it, and that's it, which could be fairly short. Or do we have to go into more detail on how the various pieces fit together? Or do we even not need this document at all? Because, if you want to use the young data model with RESTConf, it's just like any other data model that you implement with RESTConf if you want to use RESTConf. Dan is now standing on the other microphone.
Right. So Dan Romashkan standing demonstratively behind the contributor's microphone. So my take is that we should simplify, but we shouldn't eliminate completely this document because we have talking in the framework, and actually all the working group, the way we developed, we have been talking about a protocol, about defining a protocol. We have made a choice, which my personal opinion is a good choice to reuse an existing protocol rather than developing a new one. A simple document, it is kind of an applicability statement of RESTConf for Lmap purposes, as simple as it is necessary in my opinion. And the example, the encoding example, actually adds also some important information, and so I'm kind of inclined to go to the simplification of the document, but keeping it as separate.
Other opinions?
So this is Tim Carey, Nokia. I can say when we did this for 69, we had to take we had to take and do a theory of operations, what we call a theory of operations, what you would call a draft, right? Around this, around how to use, how one would use the data model, right, and the protocols, particularly how it ties into bulk data collection. So if you're using drafts that the MA requires, right, in RESTConf, like maybe call home is what you're saying, and you're using it in a way, you would probably want to say what you're using it for, because you only would have that possibly in the case of any device for the MA to do something, like you would use call home to communicate with the collector, say, right? I would document that, and if there's anything unique that you would want to have in that you would say, look, if I'm documenting call home for the MA to communicate with the collector, it would require the credentials of the collector to be stored on the device or something, whatever you feel that's necessary that would be above just a normal operating, why you would use that feature, right? That's the only thing I would pretty much document. It's kind of how you tie it all in together, right? So if you just give a list of drafts, they go, great, where you going to use call home? What am I using call home for? Oh, I'm using call home to communicate between the MA and the collector, not the controller or something like that, right?
Yes, but it still sounds to me like an applicability statement, because we wouldn't really regulate anything. We would just say, if that's your use case, these are the bits and pieces that you have to use in order to get it running, right? So if you're behind a NAT and you can't reach, and call home is your friend, but we wouldn't go into the details. So that the issue behind it, if we would go into more details, then we likely would have to block until the corresponding documents have been done in another working group. And I'm not sure it's needed.
But for stuff like call home, it's not that you're behind a NAT. It's because you are talking to the MA is initiating the conversation, right? And he's the server still, right? I mean, it's not so much that you're behind the NAT, it's because the communication pattern is I'm reporting this to the collector, right? Who isn't necessarily, unless the collector in your architecture is always a netconf or a RESTconf client.
There might be other reasons why you want to use call home, but definitely if you're behind the NAT.
You can be behind the net.
I understand, but that's just normal usage. And then I would agree that it's just a profile. You say, I wouldn't even have to say that, right? Why would you care? Because it's normal usage of it, right? But my point was that if there's specific things that you're using drafts for, or if there's drafts that you're specifically using to complete the protocol communication, right, then I think you need to document those in the draft, the usage of it.
So essentially, I'm staying here because as document editor, I'm not 100% sure what I need to write down in this document. So what I really need is input. People looking at it and saying, yeah, that's something that's useful to document. That's something that probably don't have to document. Yeah.
But did you document all the drafts that specifically an NA and MA would need, not to be a netconf server per se, right? But would need to for the communication of like the instruction down, or the reporting of the status back, or the communication of the report up. Did you kind of like document those what drafts are necessary for those types of interfaces? See what I'm saying, Jürgen? No?
Yeah, but no, it's not very much. It's RESTconf and call home, and you might want to implement NACM if you want to have access control.
So maybe that's all.
That's about it. So it's
okay,
1 page or so.
Yeah, but then that's pretty simple to describe, right? Because you're only really using 3 drafts that you need, right?
Bertwijn, but in any event, I think your points there, like the documents in netconf are not stable yet. It's good to wait for that, and having some implementation experience questions may come up, that you may want to try and answer in this document. So I would go for option 1 here, like let it sit there for a little bit. And if questions come in, you may want to add some text. And when NetConf stabilizes their documents, you may want to modify something or add something. And let's focus on the 2 other documents and get them to the IET.
Alyssa Cooper, I have a kind of related question, which is about the security considerations for the use of the protocol itself. I mean, obviously, the framework talks generally about the threat model and the the mitigations that are necessary for when this actually gets implemented, but there isn't really a place where like the mapping of that onto the actual elements of the information model is done. Is that part of the plan at all, or not really? Do you see what I'm saying? Like in terms of, okay, we said generically what needs to happen, but now we have this very specific set of elements that can be communicated, and you can communicate them all at all times of day, or you could not, right? You have choices from an implementation perspective. So is there any thought as to actually specifying some guidance about that someplace?
Well, usually in the Yang document, that's where we define concrete objects, and that security consideration sections usually have text. And I think there should be text that says, these objects might be more sensitive than others, and here's why. Yeah, for the protocol, I mean, it doesn't make sense to repeat it, but we could point to it and so that people find the right places where relevant security is discussed. That's probably all we can do.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so here's my suggestion. Get kind of the simplified, just the 1-page list of pointers text, a score text, modify also the annex for the JSON encoding example, post it. It may be, we need to see how it looks. It may be that this piece will be delayed until NetConf makes progress on their work. So, but let's try, at least from a writing point of view, to make progress and bring them as close to what we feel as a final. We may decide about holding submission to the ISG of this document.
Yeah, so again, the same applies. It's on Working Group last call. Read. This is the shortest of all of them. And send what you find missing. So I need input. Input welcome.
Thank you.
Good, so I'm done.
Okay, Olga.
There are a lot of information, so maybe it's easier if I do the clicking.
Sure. No, actually, it's not possible because you need to stand there. You are broadcast over the internet.
Then you just have to click.
Okay, I'll click a lot.
Okay, hello, my name is Olga van Seiferden, and I'm presenting today the European Commission project, Mapping of Broadband Services in Europe. Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here today, and it's nice to already see some familiar faces that have been involved in the project the last 6 months. So yeah, let's start. Yeah, we can skip that. Okay, let's start to talk about the project. So what we're going to do is we want to develop the first European-wide interactive mapping platform and database that is going to collect data on quality of service and quality of experience in one mapping application. And our approach is not to collect new data, but just to gather data from initiatives that are already existent. And therefore, we have already identified about 83 initiatives in Europe, so private and public initiatives from national authorities, NRAs, and ministries, but also private international initiatives like crowdsourcing application operators. And so the last 6 months, we have been involved with 130 stakeholders, mainly data suppliers, but also experts in different fields. One of them is internet measurement standardization. That's why we've also been in contact with the IETF, and we had Brian Trammell from the IETF IPPM working group at our stakeholder consultation workshop in June this year. Yeah, and it's very valuable for us to get input from the IETF on this project. Okay, our final product is going to be, well, a mapping application online. It's going to be in the European Commission website, and we're going to have 2 portals, one public portal and one expert portal with restricted access. For the public portal, we're going to collect a bunch of data, but we want to keep the public portal as user-friendly as possible for the general user, so we're not going to give them all query possibilities at once, but just a more simplified query structure. Data is going to be visualized on NUTS 3 regions. These are small regions, around 1 million inhabitants. And then for the expert portal, there are more, we're going to put in place more features. So we're going to have a higher resolution. The user will be able to, well, there is going to be a more complex query structure. All data sets will be available, all attributes can be looked at, and there's going to be the possibility to also have a split screen and to benchmark different data sets at the same time. And you can also download available data sets and run some analysis. Okay, we have like 4 main user groups. The first user group is the European Commission, of course, as they are the client of this project. Then we have the data suppliers. As I already said, we have national and private data suppliers, and we really want to bring them together on this application, and we want to create one central information hub where also, especially the national initiatives, can also see what other member states do, what other activities are happening in Europe, and also to engage like in a mutual learning process and to see what data sets are available. Then we have decision makers, so national authorities, EU institutions, and well, politicians at all decision-taking levels, and they can use our platform for decisions on state aid guidelines, for example. And then we have a user group of general users where we see ICT operators, customers, and academia and researchers, and there is also the IETF involved. So what can be the value added for the IETF and for us in this project? So why am I here? Why am I presenting this project today? Next slide. The Lmap working group, or the IETF in general, wants to states that large-scale measurements are essential for accurate characterization of internet performance, and therefore you want to put in place, or you want everyone to use the same measurements, same metrics, and to collect and store data in the same form. So we are in our project want to visualize and compare quality of service and quality of experience data in one mapping application. And we already realized that the biggest challenge is that data sets are very, very heterogeneous. We have 31 member states that we're gonna visualize in this map, and there are a lot of different approaches, different measurement focuses, and therefore, heterogeneity of data sets is the biggest challenge. And if there was a standard in place that everybody would apply, this big problem would disappear, and then it would be way easier to visualize all these data sets on the map. That's why we could definitely benefit from the work that the IETF is doing. But we also think that our database can be value added for you, because the data that we are collecting can be used as a kind of evidence base for you. We're gonna have all data sets available in Europe on different data set categories, and there you can see what kind of methodology is used as kind of status quo of data sets in Europe at the moment. Okay, so how are we gonna collect the data to to come to our final product, this mapping application, we're going to collect data from, as I already said, private and public authority and public organizations. We're going to offer various data formats, so data suppliers can supply their data in geo formats or table or text formats. We're going to offer templates on various spatial resolutions. So we have this NUTS 3 region resolution, which is small regions, but we go down to grid cell level from 1 kilometer to 100 meter grid cells, and we'll also collect data on address level or single measurement points. And we're going to collect what kind of data is collected. So we defined 3 data set categories and developed a data model that I'm going to present now. Yeah, when we started off this project in January this year, we first only had these notions: quality of service, quality of experience, and they were way too broad to approach data suppliers and to ask for data. That's why we saw the need to concrete them a bit more, and we came up with 3 different definitions based on the network infrastructure that the definition is taken into account. So our quality of service 1 category is theoretical, and it's the predicted network performance of existing infrastructure. This is an assessment or a calculation, it's not a measurement, and it's also taking into account marketed speeds by providers. And then we have 2 more dataset categories that are measurements. The first one is measurements through panel probes and speed tests that exclude all end users' environment. So they are we would find measurements from the SAM nose box or the RIPE box. And then we have quality of service 3, practice experience, where we'll put in data sets from the actual user's experience when using the internet access servers. So it's all measurements that are still including the end user's environment. Yeah. We also already collected some test data sets. Built on these data sets, we developed this data model. And based on that, thousands of value combinations can be collected, but we don't expect data suppliers to provide us with all attributes. So just to give you an example, the data supplier has to indicate on which data set he's collecting data. So if it's a measurement, whether it's including or excluding the end user's environment. Then they can supply us with group values, for example, wireless or wired as technology, or just single technology values. And then different quality criteria, for example, speed up, latency, jitter, whatever. And if they do specify, for example, time or technology and operator, then they can do that as well. Or they just say, okay, unknown, all time, all operators. And then we visualize it like that. Yeah, and we'll start the first European-wide data collection campaign in September this year. And while building on the data sets we're going to receive, we'll also adapt the data model if we see the need. Yeah. So the project's main challenge, as I already said, is that measurement results are affected by various aspects. On one side, we have the user with different device quality, location, environment, and different data plans that he is paying for. And also on the operator side, we have network problems, network configuration, and the problem is that these different initiatives deal with these aspects in different ways, and yeah, there's just a different methodology. So these are the technical challenges, but then as it's an EU project, there are also EU-specific project challenges. So countries are very, very cautious about their data representation, because the end product is going to be one mapping application where ideally we want to visualize data for all member states at the same time. But because the member states also know that each initiative has a different focus and has a different approach, they don't want to be compared with initiatives that have different methodology. And therefore we have to be very cautious to not compare apples with oranges. And during our stakeholder workshop in Brussels this June, actually many data suppliers, especially from national authorities, were pushing for minimum standards in order to to assure at least a minimum quality of data sets for comparison. But we don't really want to exclude any data sets. That's why for now our approach is to still collect all data sets and to define comparison groups. So to look at the methodology of different initiatives and see which initiatives are similar enough to visualize them in one map. Okay, what is the timeline? It's a 3-year project and we started in January this year. In June, we had the stakeholder consultation workshop where we presented our data collection approach for the first time. We received some feedback that we are now still incorporating. We start the European-wide data collection campaign in August, September this year, and then we'll have a second stakeholder consultation workshop in December, on the 12th and 13th of December, where we not just invite data suppliers from national authorities and private data suppliers, but also ISPs. And then by the end of 2017, we want to have our final and complete version of the platform running online. And then 2018 will only be used to automate the data collection process. Yeah, thank you for your attention. And yeah, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.
Joachim Fabini. I don't know if I got it right. So is just the visualization is to be provided, or also the data sets are to be provided?
On the platform?
On the platform.
Well, on the expert portal, we'll also want to put the feature that you can download data sets, but it's all depending on what data suppliers agree with us to do with their data sets. So we're going to put up a memorandum of understanding with each of them, and if they say, okay, you can visualize our data set and give it for free to download, then we can do that.
Okay, because exactly this is the issue. So from a technical perspective, it is challenging to aggregate and make these data sets comparable. But my experience is that the hugest challenge is the licensing of this data. You need, I just can speak for Austria, but in order to make a data set publicly available or to work with a data set that is conforming to current legislation, it is very, very, very difficult.
Okay.
Just as a...
Yeah.
Hi, Olga. Thanks for coming to speak to us. I'm going to go up and operate Dan's PC for a moment because I need to refer to a slide.
Okay.
All right.
I think so.
So it's this one. So I'll just ask the question from here if you don't mind. You've got 3 categories of QoS in terms of what data is collected.
Yeah.
And then QoS and QoE, you say here.
Yeah, we now call all data sets quality of service.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because this is definitely not QoE. When Brian's group spoke to you, there was also ITUT study group 12 there.
Yeah.
And I think they probably gave you the clear hint that when you talk about quality of experience, you got to include the application, the context, and it's really got to be the user's experience with those things.
Yeah.
And we've just refined that definition. I'd be happy to share it with you, but
Okay.
but given that you're really talking about user measured
Yeah.
performance, user measured quality of service, then that's different. So I'm looking forward to your next slide deck where QoE disappears. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. In the definition, it already disappeared, but yeah, on many slides not yet.
Very short question. This is Christian Varas from Speed Checker. Are you still interested in looking for data providers? Or
We are always looking for data providers.
okay, so maybe we can talk after that.
Yeah, definitely.
Would be
Yeah.
interested in participating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dan Romashkanu. So I'm wondering, have you read the RFC with the Lmap use cases? Actually, the one that kind of describes the provider use case, which is our kind of one of main use cases.
Whether I read them?
Yeah.
Or, no.
Okay.
I don't have a
yeah,
very technical
it would be interesting because of course, the fact that you are here means that you have had a look at what we are doing, and you believe that some kind of interaction may be useful, or you can use Lmap when completed. So the question is basically whether what you are doing, which is kind of inter-regulators data collection and normalization,
Yeah. So
is something that was taken in consideration, or Lmap can do anything to help?
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. So actually when in the beginning, the project is really only about data collection, but we realized, okay, data sets are so heterogeneous, and the final product is supposed to be a map, and we don't just want to map every initiative in a single layer. That doesn't make sense for the end user, then this whole map doesn't really have a value added. That's why we, started looking into standards or standardizing.
Jörg Schewel, I have two questions. The first one is, do you collect raw data, or do you essentially collect aggregated data?
So we prefer to collect aggregated data, because we are not the owner of the data, and already an aggregation is kind of an interpretation. So we prefer to get aggregated data on a specific spatial resolution, so either NUTS 3 level or the grid cell level. But if the data supplier only has raw data and is not able to aggregate this data themselves, then we can help aggregating the data. And we can also collect raw data. We can collect data on single measurements and address level. The only restriction is that we are not allowed to collect IP addresses, because the European Commission considers that personal data, and then therefore we are not allowed to collect this. So that has to be filtered out, and IP addresses, before supplying them to us, have to be transferred into geolocations. So in the end, we prefer that data is aggregated.
I ignored the last one.
Okay.
So the other question, because it came up earlier here, is, so if people do aggregation, do you actually know exactly what they do when they aggregate data? And are you concerned about integrity of the data that you actually get from your data sources?
So we rely on the data supplier when it comes to that. In the metadata, we ask the data supplier to describe the aggregation process that they do, to describe the methodology that how they are collecting their data. So, we can't have a look at what the data supplier does exactly with the data. We only receive the data sets, and then we ask them to describe the data in enough detail so that we know in which data category to put them, and with which other data sets to compare them.
So, Berlijn, so maybe I was a little bit asleep at the session in Brussels, but I thought you also allow the people that provide you with the data to give pointers to the raw data. Wasn't that the case? If they wanted to, I mean.
Yeah, they can supply raw data.
They can do that, right? Yeah. Actually, I would suggest that we stimulate them, that we encourage them to do that, because if other researchers want to look at the data, they probably prefer the raw data over the aggregated data, right? I would think.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for coming.
Yeah.
And please, if you can kind of join the mail list and continue to provide your input, that will be very useful. And also communicate with other chairs and with our area directors for, further interaction or participation of some of our participants in your project.
Yeah, we are happy about any input, and also for the workshop that we're going to have in Brussels in December, and we're going to send out invitations.
Yes, please send the invitation, and we'll make an exception to the policy of not actually distributing such invitations on the mail list, but when they are highly relevant, actually we do this, and I believe this may be the case.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so final fun part. Okay, so yes, but after this. So we'll solve our roadmap and our feature plans in 10 minutes, and we got 5 minutes for implementation. Okay, so here's what we wrote. The working group completes until the end of July. We should be able to update the documents, but I'm not sure about your vacation plans, Jürgen. So I was kind of cautious about putting here 1 month for updating documents.
Looks good. It could be earlier, depends on how many comments we
Earlier is always
so
better.
far it looks reasonable
Okay.
to have it beginning of August.
The second working group log call will be a little bit shorter because it's the second one. But actually we need also to distribute, and that's something that I actually need to take responsibility, but I failed to do actually distribute also the information about the last call to Broadband Forum and IEEE 802.15, I believe was, or 16 was the working group that was looking at the Lmap works. So we need to do that, and we may get some comments from out of the IETF. We may need a second interim. That depends upon the quantity and quality of comments that we'll get to the document. So this can happen in the second half of September. And then if we succeed to resolve everything, and that's of course the best case scenario, we should ship the documents sometimes in October to the ISG for consideration as proposed standard. And then we can start having a discussion about either rechartering or concluding, which are kind of the two options at this point in time. But this depends again about the contributions and the interest of people and the echo that the proposals will make, that people will have. So everything needs to happen on the working group list. At this point in time, I don't foresee a meeting at IETF 97 unless actually we hit some hurdles on the road and we need to get kind of conclusion or closure, or if we really have a very solid and enthusiastic set of proposals that were well received by the working group list. And so we need to may have kind of New York discussion at IETF 97, but otherwise we'll probably not meet. And hopefully we'll be done with the current phase by then. Any questions or comments or thoughts about this proposed road ahead? Alisa?
Alyssa Cooper. So this sounds good. The only thing I would say is if people have other ideas that they want to bring into this working group, then, as you say, that's the conversation needs to be had. Otherwise, this slate fulfills all of the chartered milestones. So there was some discussion about this previously, things being put off and prioritizing, but I don't know if there's still any interest in some of those things that are out of scope. So.
Right. So there were a number of proposals down the road. We kind of encourage people to continue to work in parallel, but gave priority to the charter item. So now it's time, if people are still interested, to bring them up again. And if there are no more comments, then we have a time for a short demo of the implementation. You want to use this? Okay.
So there's not going to be something fancy to see here. So if you want to see something fancy, then continue reading your emails. One of my students wrote an implementation some time ago, and I think we showed some of it during one of the interim meetings 1.5 years ago. And in February, I started rewriting essentially, well, pretty much all of it. And the intention is to have an implementation written in C that is, efficient enough that you can run it into a CPE kind of environment. So it should not consume lots of resources. Now, the way things work, I've written a daemon that reads the configuration and the instructions in Lmap speak on startup. I'm just reading it from the XML serialization. So there's a configuration file somewhere which looks like this, and here's just the XML serialization of what is in the Lmap data model. And there's another file that has the serialization of the instructions. Don't just take it as XML conforming to the Yang data model. I wrote tools. I had to read this, and in order to process as I actually wrote tools, I actually can do a round trip conversion and spit it out again. I can validate things. So there's a little utility that's called Lmap control. And I can do things like, read the XML validated, and it's a Unix system, so if you don't see anything, everything is fine. Otherwise, you would complain. And that also allows you to easily interact with the daemon that's actually doing the background processing. So if I start the daemon, I'm running it in the foreground, so it actually tells you something normally wouldn't even tell you anything. So it starts up, and that's what happens. I'll put it into the background. Now, the daemon is reading the configuration and setting up all the schedules, trying to execute something. Sometimes things might fail. For instance, this is a schedule that tells to run an action that's executing happy, which isn't installed on the machine. So I specifically have errors in the configuration file. This is a runtime, an error triggers a runtime failure. Now, in order to take a look what the daemon is actually doing, the daemon exports the operational state, again, in an XML file internally. That's conforming, again, to the data model. And my little control tool is able to read that and turn that into a human readable, more easy readable representation. So what I can do is I can run Lmap control and say, give me the status of what you're doing, and you get something that looks like this. Now, you might say that's not really readable, but you get used to read this. Now, the nice thing is you can actually run this in a loop, and then you get a top-like interface about what the daemon is actually doing. So you see at the top, you see information about the measurement agent itself, so its agent ID, what kind of hardware and firmware. So we have all these objects and the information and data model. And then below you have the list of all these schedules and actions that the probe knows about. And everything which is not indented here is actually a schedule name. So there's a schedule named demo, and it has 2 actions inside. You should run MTR, which is a traceroute program, and it should run happy, and you have seen that happy won't run because it's not installed on the system. Here's a second schedule called pinger, another schedule called sleep. The sleep schedule is just for experimentation. It doesn't do anything. It's just called sleep for a while. The reason I have the sleep schedule here now, output from the daemon is interfering, is that I can play with the mechanisms like suppressions and upper bound limits on the execution time. Now, the next column here encodes the state of what the schedule is in. So the demo schedule is currently enabled. Happy here is suspended. The reason is that the daemon figured out I actually don't have an executable, so I don't even have to try to run this. Startup here, that's the schedule that's bound to a startup event, so that's only executed once when you start up the system, and it immediately moves afterwards into the disabled state because it's done. The data here produced by running the trace routes actually is being forwarded to the report primary schedule. So you do trace routes according to the schedule, and data goes into another schedule. The next columns have statistics about what's happening. So the number of invocations, the number of suppressions that took place, the number of invocations that weren't carried out because the previous one was still active. So we have this idea of things might overlay. In that case, we don't really restart. We let the original one continue. And you have error percentages. So happy is failing always, so it's 100% errorness. And that's aggregated up towards the schedule level. This column has the storage information. So here you see that actually measurement data is actually coming into the report primary schedule, and it's actually queuing there until that would actually execute. And then you have here information about the last execution, the last return code that you got. So these are 0 is okay, 1 is an error code, an error return code, and a negative number is a signal received. And so last invocation time, last completion time, last failure time, it's everything that you find in the data model. And that's kind of my debugging view on, what is the daemon doing, right? And trying to figure out. Now, it doesn't fit in here, so I have to make the font smaller. So down here, you see suppressions. So there's a suppression configured on the daemon that kicks in every odd minute. So the status of the suppression is enabled. So it will kick in whenever I hit an odd minute. Currently it's 58, so that's not odd. When it's getting 59, you will see that some of the schedules and actions start changing the state to being suppressed. Well, here you see some running. And if it's getting 59, it's amazing how long a minute can be. Yeah, probably the time just stopped. Yeah. Yeah. So you see actually suppression kicking in, changing the status here of the whole schedule here. Yeah, and then so things get suppressed and the counters accordingly. Yeah. So that's essentially it. So it's a small daemon kind of trying to implement all the functionality in terms of what you get. So that's running on some virtual whatever Linux machine. So that's kind of the resources that it eats. It's reasonably small. What I did during the hackathon, so I went to the hackathon here because this doesn't talk any protocol. And at the hackathon, there was a project, it's called sysrepo, and they kind of implement a data store, a general data store repository. So I'm currently reading up my configuration from a file. And so I changed the code to actually read data out of this repository. And you can hook a protocol front end that also talks to the repository. So the repository is kind of the mediator between the protocol front ends and my backend daemon. And so I learned how their tooling works, how the setup works, and I started writing the code that actually integrates. And so you can get a netconf. They currently don't have a RESTconf. You get a netconf front end that can talk to the system repo database, and that feeds updates and changes back to my daemon so I can adjust and do whatever is needed. But that's, hackathon style. It works, but it's incomplete. Needs a little bit more thought to work it all out. But basically, the basic idea seems to be workable. Yes, and that's kind of it. The code is currently not on GitHub because I'm too lazy to upload it, but the code is going to be under the BSD license. If you take a look at it, send patches. I'm happy to share the code.
So thank you. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll continue our work on the mail list.